Welcome to the quick hitter version of Buckets, Boards, and Blocks. I'm Monica McNutt. This week, our featured discussion is with journalist and tremendous writer Erica L. Ayala. Here, she talks about her background in child advocacy and the sincere work that the WNBA has been able to do this season.
I come from a background in actually being a professional advocate in child advocacy. And so to have that lens, I sometimes can be critical when it comes to athletes or businesses entering into advocacy space. Because there's a lot of work and years of work that go into advocacy. And for me, this season in the WNBA has really laid a foundation for players to not only be empowered and to use their voice, but to also be part of the learning process. There are things that when you want to change policies or how things are done in society that you have to humble yourself. And for me, again, coming from my background, that has been what's been the most exciting. And I think also you mentioned the Satu Sabally story. I also was able to talk with Layshia Clarendon, and they have had an amazing trajectory to get to a place where they're comfortable being an activist. And that's a word that Layshia and an organizer, those two words are words that Layshia now uses. And there's just a level of commitment that it takes to be at that level. Or a Satu Sabally, who is so committed to being a presence when it comes to a lot of what we're talking about, racial injustice, but at the international level, and engaging particularly Europe. I know that's like an entire area, multiple countries, but you know, she comes from Germany, but having those types of conversations. And so for me, that's been most rewarding, is that there is, this isn't, you know, a final destination. This is an ongoing process. And I've loved being able to tell stories that reflect that.
Yeah, and you've done a great job telling those stories. I missed the Layshia piece. Who was that for?
That was for The Athletic. So Layshia Clarendon, and was able to explore just some of the parallels that Layshia felt this season in particular, between coming in, you know, Cal had that top recruiting class, and them going to the WNIT 2 years in a row, which felt like a failure, and having to rebuild that team, to how she now is in a completely different role, but a similar path with the New York Liberty. That's a team that's rebuilding on the rise. And now Layshia is a veteran there that has to really show these rookies the way.
Yeah, and she definitely had some outburst performances this year. I remember early in the season thinking, you know, she may not be a marquee name when you think of how many high draft picks that New York Liberty squad has and how young they are. And yeah, the conversation was, this team is young. Don't expect too much this year, particularly after Sabrina got hurt. But the integrity, the leadership, the experience, that is a piece of that puzzle that you cannot write off, even though this year for them has come to an end. Moving forward, that's someone who you can trust to be a stable building block for so many more reasons, not just her ability to score.
Absolutely. And one thing that I loved that Layshia talked about throughout their entire journey is that Layshia has been at her best basketball, which was her all-star year, when she entered as her complete self and was able to really talk about who they are, and just embrace fully all of the pieces that make, as Layshia would say, them a perfect candidate for, you know, intersectional activism.
And that's, I mean, I have learned so much through these women this year. I can remember one of my good friends works for the PR agency Fleshman and Hilliard, who facilitated the conversation with the women of the Say Her Name campaign. And this is, we're now talking about multiple moms who have lost daughters at the hands of law enforcement. But then Janelle Monáe hops on at the end of that conversation.
Yes.
It turns to Michelle Obama the next day, and just seeing Sydney Colson and some of the other players on that call, having the opportunity to truly engage and to see, and again, learning from Layshia, she was the first person that put this idea of performative allyship on my radar. But to see the integrity with which the WNBA as a collective has moved, with which each individual player who feels the call strongly to be at the forefront of this has moved. And even those who maybe would not identify themselves as activists or organizers, but to see them in line and supporting their teammates who are speaking boldly. It has been incredible. Erica, why do you think it is, though, that the question in my head, I was going to try to say it more eloquently, but why do you think it took everybody else so long to get it? I mean, these women I keep saying have been about this. Like, if you know the W, they've been about this.
Yes, that is the question, isn't it, Monica? And you mentioned, some of the independent stuff that I've been doing, which includes a YouTube series where I'm talking to athletes about social justice and activism. And in one of those, when I was talking about basketball in particular, I just see so many parallels between basically any movement, any civil rights movement that we've seen. Unfortunately, women, but especially Black women, are often the front line, but for some reason don't always make it to the top when we're talking about the history of such movements and the impact of such movements. Somehow those frontliners end up getting lost within that history. So I honestly, there's a glaring answer, and that just is that we're a society that's not prepared to listen to women, to hold women and their work in high regard. And that's unfortunate because we're missing out on a lot. We've talked about social justice. These are amazing mothers, amazing partners, amazing community members, and obviously, we've already talked about how they just ball out of their mind.
Absolutely. No question. If you'd like to hear more, check out the full version of Buckets, Boards, and Blocks with me, Monica McNutt, and my co-host, King McClure from Pure Hoops Media.